The events take place in the picturesque village of Miao, where in the backyard of one of the houses 2 people were talking about something unusual. It turned out that one of them was performing a special ritual using an empty turtle shell, several coins, and a special towel. This dialogue involved a young guy and an elderly man, probably a student, and his mentor. After the ceremony, it became clear that the old man had reached the limit of his strength, and unfortunately, he could no longer take care of his ward. From the guy's reaction, it became clear that it was difficult for him to believe this, but the grandfather's hexagram allowed only a slight deep. An elderly man decides to send his grandson to the city so that he can start his own life, despite the guy's resistance. He also reminds his student not to abuse the skills he has taught him and emphasizes that he needs to work hard. The next day, they collect all the necessary things and leave by bus from their home village. The guy's name is Yang Yang. He turned 18 this year, and it looks like his life is about to undergo significant changes. Finding himself an orphan, he grew up with his grandfather, spending his entire life in his native village. His guardian, a well-known master and experienced physician in the area, practiced various methods of treatment. From childhood, the child was attentive and learned a lot from his grandfather, prescribing medications and acquiring knowledge. However, he was especially attracted to Miao Zhang's secret technique, which was considered mysterious in this area. Despite all his skills, Jan felt comfortable only in the company of his grandfather, and everyday life seemed difficult to him. Everyone around looked at him as the reason for the death of their parents, which caused the guy's indignation, and he swore to fight as if the whole world had become his enemy. The tall buildings of the city made him feel like a stranger in this unusual place. Upon arrival at the indicated address, the grandfather introduced the guy to his aunt, who was raising her daughter, and now Ian had to take care. Before they entered, the old man explained that city life was different from country life and Ian should become more serious, and he assured that they would eventually. The door was opened by a beautiful woman named Taniyu. She was 33 years old, and she immediately recognized little Yang and invited them into the house. The guy was embarrassed, not expecting that his aunt was so young, and thoughts arose about whether all the women in the city were so attractive. Entering the house, Taniyu asked the guy to make himself at home, remembering that his grandfather had once saved her life. A woman's voice was heard from the bathroom on the 2nd floor. Tanya's daughter asked her mother for pajamas, and Tanya asked Ian to do it for her. The girl handed him her daughter's pajamas with lemons, and the guy was surprised at how soft the women's clothing was. Rising to the 2nd floor, Ian realized where the girl was when he heard the sounds of singing from the bathroom. He opened the door, explaining that his aunt asked him to give her clothes. The girl did not hear him because of her own singing, thinking that her mother was coming. When she looked up, she blushed deeply, realizing that a strange guy was standing in front of her. The reason for this was her recklessly throwing off her only clothes, without expecting someone else's appearance. There was an awkward silence in the room. The guy and the girl stood looking at each other, both silent. A few moments later, the girl hid behind a screen, ordering Ian to close his eyes and accusing him of perversion. Ian did not feel guilty about the situation and expressed the opinion that both of them were responsible for this awkward moment. However, the girl refused to even listen to his explanations and abruptly took the clothes out of. As a result, the mistress of the house hit Ian forcefully between the legs, continuing to accuse. The blow turned out to be strong, and at that moment the guy would not have envied anyone. After that, he was thrown out the door, and the passage to the bathroom was quickly locked. Standing in front of the door, Ian tried to hold back a cry of pain, telling himself that he meant. Later, the girl remembered her mother's words that they would live with a village boy. Ian approached her with an apology, but she continued to express her hatred even though he had become friends with her mother. Her daughter's name was Yuri Shue, and she was also 18 years old, and she continued to reproach the guy, considering him a liar and hoping. In response, the guy insisted that he was not a liar, suggesting that she check it out, since she did not have all the information. But Yuri showed no interest in checking, considering both the guy and his grandfather to be ordinary deceivers. At some point, Yang became angry, approached the girl, causing her fear, and ordered her not to insult her grandfather in his presence. He pinned Yuri against the wall and told her that she could call him whatever she wanted, but she had no right to insult his grandfather. Annoyed, he asked her who she thought was a liar, and Yuri replied that if he wasn't a liar or a pervert, then what was he doing here? After that, Ian realized what had happened and decided that there was no point in arguing with the girl now. He let go of her, but traces of the strong squeeze of his hand remained on her skin. Yang then simply put his hands in his pockets and walked away as if nothing had happened, with Yuri shouting after him that she wasn't finished yet. Yuri kept calling him a pervert and promised that someday he would pay for this. Going down the steps, the guy thought about the injustice, because his grandfather saved her mother's life, and she still considered him a liar. When he got to the first floor, he saw only his aunt sitting on the sofa and asked her where his grandfather was. Tanny announced that Grandpa Ian had left, fearing goodbye and dealing with too many emotions, and this news greatly saddened Ian. The aunt invited Jan to come and talk, and she expressed a desire to discuss important issues. However, Ian was in no mood to talk and resolutely went in search of his grandfather. The aunt replied that grandfather had already spent all his strength leaving. Ian realized that his actions could lead to trouble and did not want to scare his grandfather. The next day, the three of them went to school, and Andy had already completed all the necessary documents, and now Yang and Yuri would study together. With a smirk on her face, Yuri assured her mother that she would take good care of her new friend. Thus began a new chapter of Ian's life in a new school and an unfamiliar city, and new challenges lay ahead of him. On the first day, while walking during recess, Ian was overwhelmed by a crowd of high school students, and they were asking if he was the new kid. It was immediately clear that their intentions were hostile, and one of them pushed Ian in the chest for no apparent reason. This caused Ian to fall, and the three bullies noticed that he seemed unfamiliar with their school rules, which was unacceptable. One of them, a blonde one, introduced himself as Master Dong Tai and stated that he was going to teach Yang discipline. But Yang was not pliable, realizing that these rules were made up, and he replied that he could not be oppressed because he would. In response, Dong swung at him, so that he would remember that this was the first rule of their school. The bully punched Ian, thinking his fist would meet the newcomer's face, but Ian easily dodged it. Yang didn't attack people first, but when he was attacked, he felt obligated to defend himself. Promising to introduce them to his village's martial arts, Yang slammed his elbow into Dong's chest. The blow turned out to be powerful, and the bully almost fell. He was supported only by his comrades who arrived in time. The group decided to attack Ian at the same time to show him his place. They rushed at him together, but the newcomer turned out to be a skilled fighter, successfully coping even with several opponents. While the guy was resisting the attack of several hooligans, Dong decided to take advantage of the situation but Ian quickly found his bearings, noticing that all the chaos was unfolding on the sand and deftly dodging. He picked up even before the leader of the hooligans hit him from behind. The hero threw the sand he had picked up right into his eyes. And while Dong was trying to recover, Yang rushed at him, demanding that he beg for forgiveness. The guy knocked the bully to the ground and shouted that he had not harmed him. Then why did they pick on him? In response, the blonde spat in his face and ordered him to just shut up, demonstrating his habit of losing. Having not heard the desired apology, but only receiving even more insults, the guy thought for a moment that but suddenly one of the teachers ran up to them from behind, ordering them to stop, and in his heart, the guy thought that these weaklings called the teacher only because they could not defeat him. The guy needed to come up with a way to justify himself, and Ian used his knowledge, knowing that the vessels and the teacher quickly approached them and sharply inquired how they got involved in such a serious fight, with the initial suspicion being on Dong Tai. However, the bully insisted on his innocence, shouting that the villager was just pretending, since he was not hurt at all. Ian told the full truth. He had just started studying here, and these guys came up, promising to introduce him to the local rules. Understanding where everything was going, the teacher quickly recognized the gang and advised the hero not to be afraid to defend. He reprimanded the hooligans and warned that they would soon be followed. And at that time, Yuri appeared around the corner. A similar thought came to the guy, who noticed that Yuri had been watching what was happening all this time. And at first Yuri was scared, but quickly came to her senses, and she was still angry with the guy and didn't even want to talk to him. The girl did not miss the opportunity to continue screaming at the guy, and the hero sighed heavily, wondering how such a kind aunt could have. Returning home, Ian thought that the hooligans would most likely come back for another try, and from experience he knew that it was not so easy with people like them. The guy decided that he needed to carefully prepare for the next encounter, using his skills. Leaning near the side of the road, he pulled out some root. It turned out to be a poisonous plant called duya. Yang remembered that mixing it with alcohol and other ingredients produced a cure for temporary memory loss. Having easily prepared the medicine, the hero only had to test it at a functioning facility to make sure of its effectiveness. The scene changes, and we find ourselves at school, where our hero is sitting in class and actively writing in his notebook. Suddenly his attention is attracted by a pin cap that the teacher throws at his head, and after all, he never answered any questions throughout the lesson. It was the homeroom teacher, Yue, and she walked up to Yang and ordered him to stop immediately. The woman noticed that he had been doing something under his desk throughout the lesson, and it turned out that he was experimenting. The guy quickly found an excuse, taking out a bottle from under his desk and saying that he just wanted to drink water. Jokes about this erupted in class, irritating the teacher, who responded by angrily doubling everyone's homework. Soon the lessons ended, and the school children hurried home, in the rain that had started outside. Because of this, it was decided to stay in the school building a little longer, since the weather was really not favorable. In addition, he needed to make a few adjustments to his potion, and soon he finished the preparation and made several holes in the bottle cap. Suddenly, from a nearby audience, a woman's scream came, which seemed familiar to him. The guy had definitely heard it somewhere before. As he got closer, he realized that it was Yuri's voice, and from her conversation it became clear that hooligans had picked on her, demanding money from her. It seemed that they had already been forced to pay for the guy's treatment, and now they were demanding even more money, and one of them hit the girl in the face. Ian was in no hurry to come to the aid of his new neighbor, believing that she deserved such treatment, because what goes around comes around. Dong Tai, who hit the schoolgirl in the face, continued to shout at her in anger because she called the guy a simple hillbilly. Immediately after this, a tall man approached him from behind and ordered him to calm down, as he was showing too aggressive behavior. Yuri was grateful for the support and, with tears in her eyes, said that perhaps it was time for her to go. Her mother would come for her. The large man asked the schoolgirl if she really wanted to go home, and if so, he was not going to keep her. But on the condition that she spend a little more time playing with him, at which point he pushes her onto the desk and begins to tear her clothes off. A crowd of villains gathered around them. Some were filming what was happening on their phones, and some praised the leader and nodded approvingly so that Yuri could only scream and beg to be let go. She cried and begged to be left alone. However, these villains were not going to stop, claiming that she was more self-confident before. At this moment, the girl turns her head and notices that Yang is standing nearby, and with tear-stained eyes, she asks him to say. After this, the hero realizes that this is no longer a joke, and his conscience tells him that he is obliged to stand up for his friend. The leader of the gang looked at the guy and asked if this was the guy who dared to beat his younger brother. Without waiting for an answer, Dong Tai confirms his brother's words and says that it is he. Ian, observing the situation, quips that they are just weaklings and take out their anger on the girl for being beaten. He had seen many criminals, but this was the first time the guy had seen villains without any eggs of his own. The hooligans were amazed by such audacity, and they grabbed the reinforcement and at the same time attacked the guy. However, from the expression on the hero's face, it was clear that he was not at all afraid, and confidence in his victory was visible in his eyes. The villains surrounded him on all sides, so that Yang found himself completely surrounded by enemies, and one of the big guys asked why this hillbilly decided to. He even suggested that the guy run to his mother, but he advised his opponent to talk less. The game was ready to go into a fight stage, but the girl warned that they had more people, while continuing to cry, and Ian didn't care about the number of opponents. He was only annoyed. He advised her to quickly leave here, since she was of little use here, and the girl did not want to leave her. In response, Ian threw his jacket at her, saying that she herself wanted him to be beaten. Yuri took the jacket, but the feeling of guilt was too strong, and she did not dare to leave, and she did not know what to do. More tears streamed down her cheeks. The girl brought the guy's jacket closer to her. In the end, she makes up her mind and, saying that she will now call the police, Yuri runs out of the classroom. But the villains were not going to let her go so easily. One of them tried to stop the girl, because they were not finished with her yet. At the same moment, a powerful blow from the hero lands in his back, and from the blow immediately after this, a second blow followed, and one of the opponents was already unconscious, and the rest decided to take it. Yang knew that in his position he couldn't handle them all at once, so he had to just grab one and beat the rage out of him. It was necessary to act very quickly, and in the end the hero decides to attack the strongest of the gang. The big man stood at some distance, in no hurry to intervene in the fight, and you would have to make an effort to get closer to him. Suddenly the guy remembers the potion he just prepared. He wants to experience it in practice. Ian takes a bottle of liquid from his back pocket and begins to spray the contents around him. The poison hits all enemies without exception. Some begin to lose consciousness and attack each other, and the leader tries to figure out what hit him in the face. Soon all the bullies fall to the ground and groan, and one of them asks what the guy is going to do with them. This time, Yang, stretching his neck, invited his opponents to guess for themselves what his intentions were. The guy had a chair in his hands, and with full strength he began to beat his aggressors. An uncontrollable rage flickered in his eyes. A few minutes later the fight ended, and the hero left the battlefield victorious, and justice was restored. He then approached the main aggressor and raised the issue of his tiger tattoo, hinting that the design looked more like a sick cat. The villain was powerless due to the action of the poison, and he accused Ian of behaving ugly because Ian assured them not to worry. The poison should have worn off in a few minutes, but next time he wouldn't be so lenient. Going out into the street, where the rain continued, the hero wondered why he even got into a fight with them. Emotions overwhelmed him, and finally he screamed to the whole world, taking out all the pin-up rage. Suddenly, from behind a tree growing nearby, Yuri turned to him, and she finally waited for him. A moment later, she rushed to him with hugs and tears in her eyes, and the girl did not foresee such. According to her, she was afraid that hooligans would haunt him all his life, so she did not go to the police. And the guy assured that everything was. Yuri apologized and said that it was all her fault and she was very sorry, but at that moment Ian was interested in something else. The girl noticed that he was looking at her, and her reaction was instantaneous, and the guy was too careless. As a result, Yuri came to the conclusion that the hero is still a good person, but there is still a pervert in. They finally arrived at the red car, and it was Tanny who had come to pick them up from school. In the car, my aunt asked what happened to them, and she, of course, did not believe their lie that they had fallen. But she did not condemn them, but said that wrestling is a great way to get to know each other, and the mother advised her daughter to take care of her brother. But in response, Yuri says that she will never accept this pervert as her brother, and nevertheless she had to thank the guy for his help. Tanya was happy with this answer and suggested that they change clothes, and after that they all headed to a Japanese restaurant together to have a delicious dinner. Yang was also happy, and his whole body ached, but he felt an inner warmth, and he wondered if he could have another. Sometime later, they were already enjoying dinner at a local restaurant with Japanese cuisine, and the aunt turned to the hero. Suddenly, she took out a brand new phone from her bag and handed it to Ian, thinking that now that he lived in the city. The girl looked at the gift with envy. It really was a new, expensive phone, but the guy didn't know much about phones. Suddenly, a man in a yellow shirt approached their table. He turned to the woman and expressed surprise. It turned out to be the head of the company that Tanny worked for, and she told the guys not to worry, and the man also noticed Yuri's presence. Turning to the girl, he said that she, like her mother, was very attractive, like a goddess. By chance, a man rented a VIP room for an important client and invited the heroes to join them. But Tanny did not agree, considering it inconvenient, and they did not expect to stay here for a long time. The boss insisted and hinted that it was better to agree if she wanted the deal with the client to go through. Tanya had to compromise and told the guys to wait and then come back, and her daughter tried to dissuade her mother. Yuri was extremely worried, suspecting that this man had evil intentions towards her mother, and besides, a full hour had already passed since Tanya left. Suddenly, a restaurant employee approached them and said that Tanya had drunk a lot and asked him to take the guys home, but Yuri was not going. The waiter assured her that the bill would be paid and suggested that she just wait for her mother at home, but Yuri insisted. At this moment, the hero had a suspicion that something was wrong, because his aunt was not the type to drink. A plan instantly formed in his head, and grabbing Yuri's hand, he suggests the girl is outraged, but the guy whispers in her ear that her mother could have fallen into a trap, and they need to help her somehow. Leaving the restaurant, Ian grabs one of the bottles from the table which turns out to be part of his plan. The characters pretend to be heading home as they leave the restaurant. Yuri asks Ian why he is acting this way at this important moment. Realizing that Ian has a plan to save her mother, Yuri tries to find out its details. It turns out that Ian didn't just take a bottle of alcohol, and he knows chemistry well and knows that alcohol is flammable. Yuri fearfully asks if he is going to burn down the entire restaurant. Ian asks her not to say such stupid things, and in fact he plans to smoke the bad guys out of the room where they are keeping his aunt. Yuri likes Ian's plan. She thinks it's cunning but effective, and she can't wait to implement it. The hero doesn't quite understand how to react and decides to take it as a compliment. Inside the VIP room where Tanya was invited, voices were heard. They were discussing something. There were several men in the room, and a woman lay unconscious, and it was obvious that she had been deliberately drunk. This was confirmed. They slipped something into her drink, as a result of which Tanny lost consciousness, and the men were clearly planning something bad. They stood over her, deciding what to do next, and one of them offers to take responsibility for her. Despite the horror of the situation, the men continued to joke and laugh. Eventually, one of the men approaches the woman, and with each passing minute, his intentions become clearer. Suddenly, acrid smoke begins to fill the room, and everyone present begins to cough, and it seems to them that there has been a fire. However, right next to the door is Ian, using a fire extinguisher and a homemade cocktail to smoke out the cockroaches. To be more effective, the guy even starts a small, controlled fire, hoping that this will increase panic. The people inside, frightened by the fire, begin to run from the room, screaming for help. As soon as they leave the premises, Ian comes inside and these fools are so scared that none of them even notice him. Upon entering, the room is full of smoke and it is difficult for him to see anything, and he shouts his aunt's name, but no one answers. Finally, he finds her lying unconscious, and the rogues have fled, leaving his aunt here. Quickly grabbing it, Ian heads towards the exit, trying to leave this place as quickly as possible. With relief, he realizes that everything worked out and nothing serious happened, and turning to his aunt, the guy assures that they will soon be home. The guy jumped out of the room filled with smoke. Workers with a fire extinguisher barely had time to follow him. As he was leaving the building, the hero's phone rang, and he instantly realized that it was a call from Yuri, since she was the only one who had his. The excited voice of a girl was heard on the phone, asking if he was okay and if he managed to save her mother. It turned out that these scoundrels told everything to the restaurant workers. Perhaps they were going to call the police, and Ian assured that everything was under control and asked to call a taxi. All this time Tanya was in a strange state. Her skin turned red, and she constantly said that she was hot. She was breathing heavily, and suddenly the woman turned to the guy, saying that she felt very strange. At that moment, the hero realized that the villains had drugged her with some substances, which was the reason for his aunt's strange behavior. They got into a taxi, but Ian did not want to bring the woman home in this condition, and he decided to take her to the hotel. During the taxi ride, Tanya continued to behave strangely, saying that she was very hot and asking the guy to help her. Seeing such a picture, the taxi driver mistakenly thought that he was taking a couple to their apartment. In response to this, The guy got angry and advised the driver to talk less and just do his job. A few minutes later, they found themselves inside a 24-hour hotel with a good place to wait. After they took the room, the guy was a little embarrassed, and this room looked like an apartment for newlyweds. His aunt said that she was very dizzy, and the guy promised her that he would think of something. Luckily, the room had a bathtub, and it was just what I needed to cool down the temperature. Under the influence of drugs, the woman continued to behave strangely, but thanked the guy for saving her today. To this, Ian reminded that there is no need to blame him like that, because they are one family, and besides, now he needs to use a special technique to get rid of. Tanya completely trusted the guy, so he decided to start immediately, and the hero was excited, because this was the first time he used this skill. He warned the woman that the process might be a little painful, and that in order to do everything necessary, he had to lay her on the bed. Yang's excitement was incredibly strong, and he really hoped that everything would go but there was nowhere to go, and he began to complete a task that turned out to be more difficult than he expected. It turned out that this special method involves a special massage that needs to be carried out for at least 30 minutes, and, fortunately, Tanya felt awkward because she was older than the boy, but he helped her avoid serious problems. She has to be a superwoman, and that puts a lot of pressure on her, but Tanya has to do it for her boyfriend and her daughter. Returning home soon, having heard the woman's words, the hero decides that he will always help his aunt in the future. Late at night, lying on his bed, the hero was he never imagined that women had to work so hard to earn a living and face so many difficulties. He also remembers a conversation in a taxi on the way home, and Tanny told him that sometimes she has to take stupid steps because of work. But she needs to do this, because work is the only thing that keeps them afloat, especially after her husband leaves the family. At one point, his thoughts were interrupted by knocks on the door, and the guy did not expect that someone would come so late. Upon opening the door and looking down, Young noticed Yuri with a searching look and a question in her eyes, asking if he really hated her. Young didn't quite understand what they were talking about and asked why she came so late. Perhaps something happened to her. In reality, everything was fine. The girl just wanted to look into his room and asked if he could let the children in. They sat on the bed and discussed what had happened. Mom didn't want to tell her daughter, so she turned to the hero. She did not resort to questions, but simply said that she was glad, because her mother was very calm now. Although she were trying to hide her embarrassment, Yuri nuzzled her stuffed toy and quietly thanked her. After that, she approached the guy and said that he was a really good person, which confused Ian a little. At one point, the girl came too close, and why are all the city girls so brave? Rising literally close to Ian's face, Yuri asked him if he had really grown up without a father and mother all his life. The guy seemed to have experienced a small emotional leap. Why did she ask such a question? And it didn't seem like it was the best timing. As a sign of gratitude for saving Tanya, the girl believed that the hero could consider this house his own. Returning to her room, she added that her gratitude should not be overly expressed, since it seemed to her that she was doing. The girl's words amused the guy, and with a smile he thought about what to do with someone like her. Sitting back on the bed, the guy wondered why he was even angry with her, given that he had met much less pleasant people in his life. The next morning, he was invited to the teaching office where the teachers were, and it turned out that he had been paid an amount of 1,000 yuan. It immediately became clear that this was money for medical bills, and he was told to give it to the class teacher. It turned out that someone actually paid the bully's medical bills, but the guy himself knew nothing about it. The teacher did not believe him and in a rude tone ordered him to behave normally in class, not to pretend. The guy instantly realized that he was brought here by the teacher specifically to preserve his pride as a teacher. Then Yue handed the hero an envelope with money and warned him to be careful in the future in class. The guy took the money, thinking at the same time that, despite the beauty of the teacher, her character leaves much to be desired. Thoughts arose in his head, and, apparently, he noticed some detail in the woman's behavior. Turning to her, he received a rude and short answer, despite the fact that she did not even open her eyes. The hero asked if Yue had been experiencing headaches lately. The question confused the teacher, and, feeling angry, she hit the table with her palm, surprising everyone around her. But Yang continued calmly, suggesting that the woman might be sick, noticing the box from the local fast food. Noticing this little thing, the guy realized that Yue was not eating well, which was affecting her overall well-being. She was surprised because his words turned out to be true, although she never shared her problem. Later, during recess, a classmate approached the hero and said that Lin Yu was looking for him. She previously mentioned Yuri and was known for her beauty in 4th grade. Ling Yu, an 18-year-old girl, approached Yang after noticing that he looked unusual. Despite her statement, the guy clearly caught her attention, and she asked how he could offend so many people. Their conversation was interrupted by the teacher entering the classroom and announcing the start of the lesson, still looking annoyed. Suddenly, the blonde raised her hand and claimed that Yang had pinched her butt, causing the entire class to laugh. The teacher responded calmly, saying that if she had evidence, then let her contact her after the lesson. Yue ordered the lesson to begin and asked the girl to leave. Ling Yu was not going to stop there, as she was a counterfeit of one of the bullies and was seeking revenge on the hero. She promised that whoever beat her boyfriend would not see the light of the next day, but now she had to just leave. In the end, Ian also got his share of standing on his feet in class, doing some nonsense. The day passed unnoticed, and after several lessons were over, all the students left the school building. The hero was heading home when he heard a conversation on the first floor that the ominous Tintin had again begun to attack people. Initially, this did not seem very important to him, but after listening carefully, he realized that the victim was his new girlfriend. Without a moment of hesitation, he rushed to find her, despite the dense crowd, and hurried as quickly as he could. Arriving at the first aid post, he saw an amazing picture, and the infirmary employee was talking with the director. It turned out that the director was her grandfather, and she did not miss the moment to use her position to avoid punishment. The guy looked inside and saw a beaten Yuri in a hospital bed. Apparently, she had suffered a lot. Her face was covered in bruises, and tears flowed from her eyes. She tried to cover them with her hand. The guy immediately realized the seriousness of the situation, and shouting that this was wrong, rushed to the paramedic. He stopped the director and his granddaughter, who were already preparing to leave, saying that he would not allow them to leave so easily. Tin Tin told him that it was none of his business and that he was just a hillbilly, but her face showed a complete sense of impunity. Then a worker came up and told the hero that Yuri just fell, and Tin Tin found her and brought her here. There is no need to aggravate. But the guy didn't believe a single word. He approached the girl and asked how one could get such injuries from an ordinary fall. Suddenly, Yuri grabbed his hand, asking him to stop. Yang did not expect such a turn at all. He asked why she was doing this, because it was clear to everyone that she had been beaten, and in response the girl said that she really just fell. The hero was clearly aware that she was not telling the truth, but decided to listen to her words. The situation was resolved a little, and the director and granddaughter left, leaving the guy and girl near the first aid post. Yuri asked Ian to help her hide this wound on her face. She didn't want her mother to see it. The hero happily agreed, asking his friend to wait a little while he came up with something. Walking down the stairs, he thought about how such ill-wishers could occupy high positions. Tin especially irritated him. Passing by another floor, Ian noticed how the already familiar hooligans were again beating up some guy. The hero shouts out to them that they are preventing him from passing, and orders them to leave as quickly as possible. However, it seems that the hooligans had their own plans, and when they saw the guy, they immediately recognized. Dongtai asks him why he is so proud, especially since Yuri was just beaten up and he did nothing. These words hurt Yanni greatly, and he calls the bully a bastard, inviting him to come up and show him where his place is. The enemy is in no hurry to attack him, only responding that he does not need to do anything, because soon Ian will suffer anyway. After that, the crowd simply leaves down the stairs, leaving only the guy they beat up. The hero was delighted, since this only benefited him because he had to hurry to find medicine. A few seconds after the injured guy gets to his feet, the hero is surprised at how large he was. The guy's name was Duinji, and he turns to Yang, offering to become friends, and the hero is surprised how such a big... The hero is not interested in making new friendships, so he simply passes by, advising Duinji to leave. The big man asks the guy to think again, arguing that there are many hooligans, and if they act together, it will be easier for them. Duinji tries to persuade Yang to join him, pointing out that together it will be easier for them to take revenge. But Ian does not need help. He is used to acting alone and enjoys the opportunity to take revenge on his own. After some time, the hero finally collects all the ingredients, and the most difficult part is finding the ants. Finding these small insects in the city is not an easy task, but Ian still manages. After this, he bites his finger and adds a few drops of his blood to the flask with ants. It turns out that this method is effective when you need to quickly grow ants. He also needed to find rare Chinese medicines, and for this he went to a specialized pharmacy. Ian gives the worker a note with a list of the required ingredients, each of which requires 3 pieces. The girl, after looking at the list, reports that some of these substances are poisonous and are out of stock. In order to acquire these things, he had to hide the truth that this was an order from his teacher that he was carrying out. The worker believed him, and finally the hero managed to find everything he needed to help Yuri. Returning to school, the guy thought that if he did everything right, they would be able to deceive his aunt. While crossing the road, Ian suddenly notices that a car is rushing towards him at full speed, seemingly without even intending to slow down. A moment later, it becomes clear to him that the driver is deliberately heading straight at him to hit him. Only thanks to luck the guy was able to avoid a collision, and the car rushed literally a few centimeters away from him. Barely able to stand on his feet, the guy fixed his gaze on the driver, his interest in who was driving. It turned out that an old friend of his with a dragon tattoo was sitting in the driver's seat. Ian immediately understood what was going on when he realized who was driving the car, and shouting after the villain that he should just try to return, the guy assured that he would quickly put him in his place. Later, he heard a familiar female voice behind him. It turned out to be Yue, who also wanted to see how someone, taking advantage of the moment, the hero gave his teacher the medicine that he had specially selected for her. These ingredients should have been mixed and added to the soup, but the guy was not sure whether the woman would trust him. She might just dismiss it, but Yue was pleasantly surprised that he genuinely wanted to help her. If you think about it, her student is truly a good person, and perhaps he can even be called a hero. Upon returning home, Ian continued reading the book he had recently started. Time flew by, and now Tanny returned from work, getting ready to cook dinner. As it turned out, her daughter decided to have dinner at a restaurant, and the woman hoped that the girl would invite someone with her. Suddenly, the hero notices that something is wrong with his aunt. It seems that she may lose. Helping Tanya sit on the sofa, he notices that her pulse is not very good, and most likely she has been overworked at work and should rest a little. The nephew was ready to help the woman using his special massage technique that could make her feel better. During the massage, the guy felt some embarrassment, and his mind began to fill with obscene thoughts. And what was he even thinking about? He asked his aunt to let him know if she was in pain, but in fact everything went fine, because he was fluent in the art of massage. Having driven away the ridiculous thoughts, the hero offered to massage the woman a little longer if she wanted it. However, there was no answer, and Tanya was so tired after work that she simply fell asleep right in Ian's arms. She probably gets overly tired at her job, but that doesn't stop her from maintaining her physical fitness. It was becoming increasingly difficult for the guy to maintain his composure. The woman really had great attractiveness, and he could even smell her perfume. The more nervous he became, the more difficult it was for him to control himself. His hands seemed to move on its own. At one moment, he seemed to lose control of himself, and his hands sank further and further. When it suddenly turned out that Tan was no longer sleeping, she asked the hero if he liked any of the girls at school. In fact, the guy hadn't thought about it until now. He believed that the girls at school were mean and irresponsible. Ian felt very awkward. He realized that he was probably caught, but his aunt didn't say anything, just thanked him. It turned out that she really understood everything, but reacted absolutely normally, and in the end, the guy had already. Half an hour after taking a cold shower, he felt much better and finally felt calm. It was already late, and before going to bed he remembered the previously prepared ants. His special method worked perfectly, and because of a drop of blood, his ants grew very quickly. Now these insects were much stronger and more poisonous, and Yang was preparing them for a special purpose. With their help, he was going to take revenge on his girlfriend's offender, and Tin had to be punished. The next day, on the way to school, near the fence the guy met the guy he saw. Duanji approached him and warned him that it was better for him not to appear here for a while, or even. The reason for this was Ting. She was looking for him to punish him, but Yang was not afraid at all. But, as it turned out, the girl gathered her friends, stood with bats and probably intended to attack the guy. The big girl warned him that she could do whatever she wanted because she had the director's support. The guy was not afraid and walked up to the crowd of girls, and Tin told him that at first she was going to sympathize with him. But after he called her out and did it without respect, she was forced to punish him, and the students watched it. They expected the hillbilly to simply run away, but the guy wasn't going to give up that easily. After he asked what the girl wanted, she said that if he did not publicly apologize to her, Tin looked at Ian like he was trash, and when he didn't answer, she asked if he was so scared that he couldn't talk. In response, the hero remarked that when such a piece of crap stands in front of him, these words made the girl very angry, and she warned the guy that he was going too far. Now Ting decided to humiliate Young every day of his school life, and the other girls, but the hero was not afraid. He sarcastically raised his head and pointed his finger at his forehead, provoking Ting to hit him. This was enough for the girl. She swung her weapon forcefully, hoping to hit him in the head as hard as possible. Young could not stop them, and as a result, he took the entire blow upon himself, receiving severe damage. He was saved from serious injury by Yue, who noticed that a fight was going on the school grounds. She asked Ian how he was feeling, and the guy decided that, in the end, he could do them more harm. He then pressed hard on his hand until he passed out from the pain. It worked, and Young fell unconscious into the arms of his teacher, who immediately took him to the hospital. The hero came to his senses already in the hospital. The first smell was the smell of medicine, and the guy realized that they had already paid for his treatment, which means it was time to get back on his feet. When he opened his eyes, he saw a young and pretty nurse named Tujia, and she told him that there was no need to pretend anymore. Although Tujia had discovered Yang's plan, she had no plans to share this information with anyone. She healed the guy's shoulder, and it turned out that Tujia was Yue's classmate and her manager. The girl treated the guy with understanding, but noticed that injuring yourself is very bad. The doctor told Ian that he didn't have to go to school today, and the guy breathed a sigh of relief. Tujia left, and the hero was left alone in the room, and he expected to spend the whole. A smiling Duanji entered the room to check on him and bring him some food. The hero did not expect visitors and asked the big man why he came, because he didn't even want to call him his. It turned out that Duanji wanted to make sure that the guy was okay, and once again offered his help. Ian asked his visitor why he was taking revenge. All the bad people in the school are interconnected. Together with the support of the director, they can do anything. Last year, Yang tried to confess his feelings to Ting Ting, but only received public humiliation. Yang was surprised that Duanji liked a girl like Ting Ting, and the big guy didn't want to talk about it. The guy learned that Yue had quarreled with the director because she forced the hooligans to pay for the hero's treatment costs. After these words, Ian decided that he could not afford to lie in bed. He had a lot to do. Not fully recovered, he stood up and declared that he urgently needed to return to school. Tujia saw the guy and his friend leaving, but did not dissuade them, thinking that they had. She watched the hero with interest, wondering if he was going to take revenge on someone again. The girl only regretted that she had not learned something more detailed from Ian. It seems that the guy was very. Leaving the hospital, the guys headed towards the meeting room, and Ian knew that they would now discuss what had happened. They could watch what was happening through the glass window in the door, and the hero wanted to know what the teachers were talking about. There was hypocritical talk inside that it was actually the guy who started this conflict. Although everyone present understood that this was a lie, no one dared to say a word against the will of the director. Only Yue had the courage to interrupt this performance, and she got up from the table and reminded that Yang was in the hospital. She pointed out that he could use his injury reports as evidence if the case went to trial. The girl added that even if the hero has no relatives, she herself is ready to support him in court. But the director does not believe that this village boy can pose any danger to him. At this moment, Ian himself enters the room with the teachers. All the teachers were surprised by the hero's unexpected appearance, and Yue warned him that it was better to think carefully before saying anything. After that, the guy raised 3 fingers up and added that this is how much he would ask to pay. He did this, feeling an obligation to ease the burden of his teacher, and $3,000 was just enough to pay for his study. In response, the director was delighted and called the students sane. The man agreed to the deal, but the guy will have to sign an agreement that he will not poke his nose anywhere. Ian said he agreed. Yue stood to the side all this time and just watched. She understood that she could no longer influence the situation, and she just sighed heavily. Where would our hero go now? A few hours later, the money was credited to the guy's bank account. Climbing the stairs, Ian meets 2 girls. They call the hero a poor bastard and tease him. And even when the girls and the guy separated, Ting and Lin continued to humiliate the guy, believing that 3,000. The director's daughter's words indicated that she wouldn't mind breaking a few more bones for him for a price, and he managed to maintain his composure, after which he began his plan to punish Ting. Moving 1 floor higher, he took a flask of ants from his pocket and threw them down. Leaving the place, they still continued to develop plans for the hero, unaware of any danger. Suddenly, both felt a sharp pain from the bites, and they did not realize that they were ants. They imagined that they were. Ian managed to carry out his plan, and as long as he is alive, the guy will find a way to resist them. Now all that remained was to wait. This problem had to be solved before it became an even bigger problem. The hero sat in class and thought only about how slowly time was passing and how tired he was. Finally, the lesson ended, and the guy hurried to the window to evaluate the results of his efforts. As it turned out, the ant's venom acted like a drug, and those who were bitten experienced hallucinations. Lin and Ting were running all over the schoolyard and acting like crazy. The entire school staff was watching. The situation got so bad that the teachers had to call an ambulance and send the students to a psychiatric hospital. Passing the top floor, Ian took a flask of ants from his pocket and threw them down, flooding the girls' heads with his. The successful antics of these girls were captured on camera by many people, and even teachers came running to see what was happening. The hero, satisfied with the result, walked through the streets, scrolling through the news feed. Everything developed exactly as planned. Videos and photographs of the events quickly spread online, causing concern in the press. It was impossible to stay outside for long, as lightning flashed in the sky, and the rain was supposed to start at any minute. Yang hurried home and, as he passed, he met Tujia, who was surprised that the hospital manager rode a bicycle. She had a small problem with her bike, and the rain threatened to start at any moment. The guy, without hesitation, offered to help the girl, and over the years spent in the village, he mastered some skill. Together, they began to correct the unpleasant situation, while the rain was already beginning. When 2 professionals take over the matter, the problem quickly disappears, and that's what happened this time. The hero insists that he must take Tujia home, because heavy rain is pouring outside. The girl asks how he plans to return home after this, and this situation brings them both a lot of pleasure. As soon as they started moving, a man drove up to them in another white car. It turned out to be Zhang, the director of the hospital where the girl worked, and he offers to take her home. She refuses, claiming that she can easily get home herself since she has someone who can guide her. The man is surprised, wondering who this village boy is and why Tujia chose to walk. In the end, Yang tells Zhang that he can leave, as he can cope without his help. In such a situation, The girl asks the guy to give her a ride home on a bicycle. The hero doesn't object, and they set off, and all the way Zhang wonders if the guy has a hard time turning the pedals. But for Ian, this is not at all difficult, and he could not even believe that she refused the limousine and preferred to ride a bicycle. The girl says that she can already remove the bandage, and asks where he learned to understand anatomy so well. The guy tries to say that he was just lucky, but Zhang is not naive and says that she is simply interested in where he acquired these skills. Suddenly, there was thunder in the sky, and powerful lightning lit up the sky. Because of this, the girl got scared and clung to the Yang felt embarrassed that Zhang was pressing so tightly, and it made his heart beat faster. He jokingly asks if she is so afraid of thunder that she has to cuddle up like that, and such behavior is not typical for her. The girl feels guilty, as if she is the reason the guy got wet in the rain, so she invites him to her house. When they go inside, Zhang says the guy can keep his. The hostess herself heads to her room to change clothes and asks Ian not to peek at her. Standing in the middle of the room, the hero notices that the girl's house is quite modest. He enjoys the pleasant aroma of medicinal herbs, and for a moment he feels at home. Meanwhile, Tujia returned, and she suggested that the guy change his wet t-shirt. Deciding not to bother, he took off his shirt right in front of the hostess, but she did not show the slightest. As Ian undressed, her attention was drawn to the many scars on his body, which seemed strange. As it turned out, the guy received all these scars while carrying out orders from his grandfather, who often sent him to dangerous places. Neither of them cared about the scars. The main thing is that both managed to get away from the rain. When the girl found out that a relative taught her too, a conversation began about healing tea. She was interested in learning more from Yang about his grandfather, and Tujia felt that he was a great healer. They continued discussing this topic, the hours flew by, and the guy had to leave, because it was already. That evening, lying on his bed, the hero reflected on the conversation, and it seemed that Tuts stood out very much among the residents of the city. Her smile was always like the light of the sun, and the girl was able to talk for hours about various aspects. Suddenly, Yura noticed how Yana took a seat next to him, and immediately began accusing her boyfriend of perversion, claiming that exhausted by fatigue, he decided not to argue with his girlfriend and asked her to leave him alone. However, she suddenly began to tease him and suggested that he try something new. At first, the hero felt the color flare up on his face, and he was confused, because he did not expect to hear such proposals from her. But soon he quickly came to his senses, and, to Yuri's surprise, the guy invited the girl onto the bed, assuring her that there was no need to worry, and no one, including her mother, would know about it. The friend asked to let her go because she was not ready to go that far yet, and her face turned very red. But there was very little time left. The hero, determined, gathering all for what seemed like an age, this kiss continued, and the girl was unable to understand what to do, but it was no longer possible for her. This awkward moment was interrupted only by a knock on the door of the room where they were, and the guy instantly stopped. Tanya, not finding her daughter anywhere, suggested that she might be in Jan's bedroom. The hero quickly got his bearings and hastened to come up with an excuse to not let his aunt into his room. Yuri was very shy and could not imagine how her mother would see this scene. The guy assured Tanya that her daughter was now in his room and explained that she had come for homework. After that, the girl ran to her room, not wanting to stay in the same room with him. She stopped at the exit and once again accused Ian of being a pervert, although she didn't seem all that embarrassed. The guy wondered if he should worry about what happened in his bedroom. Suddenly the thought occurred to him that Yuri might tell his mother and make him look bad. After this, the hero approached the room where the mother and daughter were, and after listening to their conversation, he understood. The woman, even after listening to the arguments, stated that she would continue to love the guy as if she were her own son, and Ian is surprised by. The next day, the guy headed to school as usual, and was met at the entrance by Dronzer with a characteristic smile. Dronzer shared with him that Ting and Lin were watching him, and he was afraid of possible problems, but the hero replied that they always behave like this. Suddenly Dronzer expressed a desire to take revenge on them for what they had done to his friend. Their dialogue was suddenly interrupted by several hooligans who surrounded them from all sides and began to threaten. After a few seconds, it became clear that Tin was behind all this, and according to her, she knew who was responsible for her. A guy with a dragon tattoo appeared with her, and their expressions indicated serious intentions. Dronzer suggested that she avoid such incidents near the school, given the numerous witnesses. In response, the man only laughed. Since none of the hooligans were afraid of the school administration, Dronzer was ready to take responsibility, and his friend told the guy that he was going to deal with. Apparently, he was really ready to confront the intruders, apparently removing a weapon from his backpack. The big man pulled 2 steel pipes from his backpack, confident that Ian would stay next to him and take these fittings into his hands. Now the guys stood with their backs to each other, and the numerical advantage was not on their side, but there was not the slightest sign of fear on their faces. The next moment a fight broke out, and the man rushed at them with a knife, and everyone else hurried after him. Dronzer, although a brave guy, was a little scared at the sight of the knife. The presence of knives on the opponents made the situation even more difficult. Yang was also surprised that they came with bladed weapons and warned his friend to be very careful. The big man realized his advantage and decided to attack first because his weapon was longer than the knife. Unfortunately, the blow was too slow and the man was able to dodge it. The situation became increasingly tense, and in this fight, winning by fair means seemed impossible, and it was necessary to quickly develop a plan. The hero decides to take the brunt of the attack and divert the attention of most of the hooligans, meanwhile recommending Dronzer to escape. Thanks to this, they managed to gain a little time, which they decided to use to escape, and the guys rushed as fast as they could. Along the way, the big guy expressed his doubts as to why they were running in the opposite direction from the school. The crowd followed them, laughing, knowing that these two would not be able to get far. The bully's goal was to corner the boys and prevent them from returning to school, and Yang and Dronzer continued to rush around. Suddenly the big man stopped and asked why they were running so fast in this direction, realizing that there was a dead end. The hero explained that by escaping, he could remain unharmed, inviting Dronzer to escape while he tried to stop them. But Dronzer did not want to run away, believing that Yang was still underestimating him, and in fact, Yang already considered them friends. The guys ran away into a narrow alley, at the end of which there was a dead end, and Ian was clearly up to something. Having become captured within the narrow walls, the big man noticed that they were far from the school, and they had nowhere else to run, while removing the fake bandage from his arm, Ian stated that he was not interested in hiding in the school. The guy wrapped his hand in a bandage so that it would be easier to hold his improvised weapon, and the hero was completely ready for a fight. Dronzer was surprised at what he saw, and only now did the big man realize that the hero had been pretending all this time. At that moment, he became confident that together they could confront this gang, and perhaps they had a chance to win. In this situation, they had no choice but to fight with all their strength and fight to the last. Ian advised his comrade to start by hitting everyone they could reach, and then attack the strongest and try to deal. A few seconds later, a crowd of hooligans was already in the alley. There were quite a lot of them, and they all had weapons with them. And taking advantage of the moment, the hero decided to attack first, deftly rushing towards Dong Tai and hitting him on the arm with an iron. Thanks to this attack, the guys had an advantage, and one of the main enemies fell to the ground and screamed in great pain, and it looked like he was in a lot of pain. Dronzer also lost no time, and not wanting to remain on the sidelines, he rushed forward, hitting one of the opponents hard. His comrade's zeal made Jan understand that he need not worry about him, because he was strong enough to handle his part. This spectacular turn of events stunned the villains, who apparently had not expected such enthusiasm from the heroes. Deciding to take advantage of this amazing chance, the guy, according to his plan, rushed at the man with the dragon tattoo only realized at that moment that Ian's injury was not real. And he realized, despite this, the gang leader still felt superior, and the bandit knew that he could handle this guy and decided to immediately respond with a counter. The knife was pointed directly at Yang, but he did not lose his calm, realizing that at that moment he was in an advantageous position. His pipe was much longer than the knife in his opponent's hand, and at the right moment, the guy struck the man's wrist. The blow was extremely powerful. The enemy fell to the ground, screaming in pain, and the villain was saved only by Tin Tin, covering him with her body, because she knew that the guy could never harm the girl. But this did not stop Ian, and he attacked the girl without hesitation. But after that, the girl fell to the ground, and the guy rushed at the bully with full force, hitting him anywhere with his homemade weapon. The spectacular turn of events shocked the crowd, causing them to freeze in place in panic, and even the hooligans were dumbfounded. In the end, all those who could still stand on their feet rushed away from the guys, and this time, thanks to their joint efforts, at the end of the fight, Dronzer approached Ting Ting and expressed concern for her well-being, and he continued to worry about her, but the girl insisted that he go away. Although today's fight did not end in their favor, these events will leave an indelible mark on the participants' memories. The big man looked dejected, but Yang lifted his spirits, telling him that his strength exceeded expectations. However, problems arose. All the guy's clothes were dirty, and he didn't want his aunt to find out about what had happened. Suddenly Tujia appeared nearby on her bicycle, and the girl immediately noticed that the guy looked strange and decided to find out what happened to his clothes. The doctor's offer to take him to the hospital is rejected by Ian, who assures that he is fine in the hospital. However, the girl insisted on calling a taxi to take the victim to the first aid station, which amazed the guy with her concern for him. Upon arriving at the hospital, the girl took over and personally examined the hero, and her concern for him was obvious, and he felt slightly embarrassed. The doctor recommends the guy to relax, assuring him that this time everything will be much less painful than the moment he injured his shoulder. Tujia admits to Yang that she noticed traces of someone else's blood on his clothes, and this causes her serious concern, and she asks the hero to be more careful. He is surprised by how upset his friend is with him and promises to be more careful to avoid similar situations. After this, Yang thanks the woman and calls her sister, and from such words the doctor becomes embarrassed. Her face turns red. The hero jokingly remarks that they are in the hospital, so he considers it normal to call the one who helped him sister, noting that the woman's hand. Suddenly the conversation is interrupted by the door opening, and someone enters the room where the guy and girl are located without knowing. It turns out to be Zhang with a happy face, happily sharing the news that his family from Belgium sent him delicious chocolate. At this moment, the doctor quickly lets go of Yang's hand, not wanting strange rumors to spread in the hospital, and the girl greets the director. Tujia tells him that she has not liked chocolate since childhood, and she is not interested in a man's attempts to woo her. But Zhang is not going to give up so easily, and with an air of slight irritation, he loudly places the gift on the table and asks if the girl is angry with him. Yang's appearance probably slightly embarrassed the guy, and the director of the hospital addressed him as if he were a child. The director's words irritated the hero. He didn't like being treated like a child, but he understood that. Suddenly a call sounded on the guy's phone, and it was a call from someone close to him. because they were the only ones who had his number. A male police officer's voice was heard on the phone, and the man asked Young if he knew Tan, since she was at the police station. The hero immediately went to the police after hearing what he heard. Inside, a woman was sitting on a chair, and a police officer stood nearby, trying to calm her down. Tan looked extremely frightened. Tears were streaming down her cheeks, and the policeman invited Ian to his place, intending to talk about the incident with his aunt, and it was this police officer who helped the woman. After that, they went outside and the man started talking, and he discovered Tan this morning while going to work. In one of the alleys, he noticed a black car in which two gangsters were trying to force a woman into the back seat. The policeman immediately came to the rescue, forcing the bandits to retreat and quickly flee the crime scene. Tan was so frightened that she could not utter a word, and she was taken to the police station and called by the last number in her phone, which turned out to be the hero's number. This was all the information the policeman could provide, and Ian was outraged that someone would dare to hurt someone close to him. The nephew took the woman home, but even in a cozy atmosphere she could not stop crying, and Tan could not understand why she deserved such treatment. These people were real villains, and Tan did not know them, seeing them for the first time in her life, and she did not harm them and did not deserve. Having come to her senses a little, the woman asks the hero if he considers her a bad person, and Ian assures that he never. He tries to find out from a relative if she has any suspicions about who could have sent these bandits, and with a trembling voice, the woman suggests that it could be who, the owner of a large company, who owes her $4 million, of which 10%. The guy suggests suing who if this is true, but the aunt says there is no point since who has the best lawyers and is also the main investor in her firm. Then she suddenly turns to Ian, begging him to help her. The woman had no one to ask for help. The aunt hugs her nephew tightly, and the guy always knew that she was a strong woman, but he did not imagine how strong. From that moment on, Yang decides that although Tan seems mature and strong, inside she is like a fragile girl in need of protection. The guy firmly decides to protect his stepmother, not wanting to see her excitement and tears. These words finally stop Tan's crying, and a smile appears on her face, and she finally calms down. She can joke with Ian, but she understands that he is still too young and naive, and there is still a lot to learn. The hero offers Tan help in the form of 30,000 yuan received from the director. But the aunt says that it is better to let Ian spend this money on himself, since the problem will not be solved by these means. The guy understands this, but inside he feels the need to do something, and he needs to come up with a plan for further action. Seeing her nephew's puzzlement, the aunt assures him that they can solve this problem together. That evening, Ian stands on the balcony, thinking about how to help his loved one, but he still can't think of anything concrete. The hero couldn't afford to let these freaks continue to bully his aunt, and in the end, there was only one way to change the situation. Realizing the situation he finds himself in, Yang decides to turn to the person who has been very kind to him, and Tujia will certainly understand. The guy shows up at the girl's place already late, but she still opens the door and asks what brought him to such a late hour. The hero is very worried. Sweat appears on his face, but there is no turning back, and he had to bring the matter to the end. The friend realizes that something is bothering the guy and asks how she can help. Yang, gathering his strength, calls Tujia his sister and says that he urgently needs money because his family is in danger. The girl is surprised, and it was difficult for her to imagine that the guy came at such a late time to ask to borrow money, and the hero is ashamed because he has never asked for a loan before, but he needed to explain the whole situation. Tujia, seeing the tension in Yang's face, takes his hand and invites him to come into her house with. The guy's heart beats at an incredible speed, and his breath catches, and at that moment he wonders what he is doing now. They sit down on the sofa, and the mistress of the house prepares tea and says that she is already aware of the situation with Tan and the trading company. Tujia promises to invest 50,000 yuan in the company, but in return asks Yang to fulfill one condition for her. It turns out that the girl wants the hero to become her unofficial bodyguard for 3 years and help her in all her affairs. This is a good deal because if Tujia had hired someone else, it would have cost her much more. The guy is amazed that his girlfriend agreed to help so quickly, and he rushes to her with hugs and promises to do everything in his power. Ian gets turned on by the compliments, but quickly comes to his senses, apologizes, and says that he was just very happy, and the girl becomes a little shy. When the friends make a deal, Tujia decides to perform the composition, and at this time the hero looks at it admiringly and in his thoughts calls her a fairy from a fairy tale. A few days later, when Yang was at school, Tan calls him and asks him in a joyful voice to come home as soon as possible. The guy is glad that he was able to at least a little help a person who is very dear to him, and he hurries to go home. Suddenly someone puts a hand on his shoulder and says something, and the hero instantly assumes that it is someone. Deciding to attack first, Yang attacks with a powerful kick, but instead of a gang bully, he accidentally hits his comrade Dronzer, and the big guy asks the guy to cool down. The hero does not realize his guilt, wonders why Dronzer suddenly appeared, and ultimately it turns out but Yang urgently needed to return home because his aunt was waiting for him, and reluctantly he asked Dronzer to tell him what he wanted to talk about. It turns out that Dronzer invites the guy to visit an unusual place where they could have fun and maybe even find the one who offended Tan. The big guy explains that many people become strong to make others afraid, and the hero doesn't want to be afraid. In fact, Dronzer wants to show his friend how strong he is by offering to visit a place. Arriving at the address, they find themselves in the red light district, where there is fun, bright signs, and women in revealing outfits. Yang realizes that they have been brought to the red quarter and asks Dronzer if they could not have found a more suitable place to look for Tan. A young guy doesn't know where to look, notices a beautiful woman and becomes the object of her attention, and she asks why he's staring at her. Embarrassed, the hero gets caught up in the conversation, and another girl invites them to have a closer conversation. Then the big guy intervenes, takes his friend away, and says that it is too early for them to have such entertainment. After some time, they come to the casino, but Ian does not want to enter it, warning that gambling can end badly. Dronzer persuades him to try, and they go inside, where the hero notices many people observe. The big man draws attention to those playing at the slot machines, carried away by the excitement, and Ian decides that this is a suitable place to. Dronzer explains that people here spend their nights suffering from gambling, and the hero decides to start searching for who. Dronzer wanted to help by reminding them that in this place, no one would be interested in their age, and Yang had already realized this. Yang notices a gang of tigers, but decides not to fight them and leaves with Dronzer. The friend reminds him that in this place, no one will ask how old they both are, and the guy. Ian then spots a gang of tigers and decides to avoid conflict, choosing to retire. Therefore, the hero turns away from them and tries to maintain composure. It is better to go. The friends decide to quickly leave their previous location, fearing the presence of members of a hostile clan in the area. However, Dronzer warns his comrade that the area they are heading to is the most dangerous in the area, and it is better for them not to be seen there. Suddenly, the guy feels a cold breath in the darkness, as if someone from the shadows is closely watching them, and his intentions portend trouble. This is confirmed when, a few seconds later, Ian notices a silhouette standing under the lantern, and the person there is clearly not. The stranger looked confident, as if he radiated a special power surrounding him. It was Hu, the leader of the tiger gang, who was responsible for the trouble with Tanny, and because of his actions, the aunt was worried and cried. Hu turns to the guy Yang. knowing his name and realizing that he is not able to resist, and this gave the Yang asks why who is stopping them, claiming that they haven't done anything to him and haven't even seen him before. In response, Who calls Doonji rude names and implies that his opinion does not matter, and the young man is dumbfounded and tries to persuade the bandit to talk, avoiding a confrontation. To such an answer, the guy loses strength, his voice trembles, and he does not know how to proceed further, only insisting. Unfortunately, his efforts were unsuccessful, and Who, silently rushing at the school children with his fists, seriously intended to teach them. The blow hit Ian's shoulder, and the attack was so strong that the guy retreated a few steps, taking advantage of the hero's confusion, Who quickly grabbed him by the head and forcefully kneed him in the stomach, which could have. At that moment, Yang was thinking that the enemy's movements were too fast, and he did not. But the man did not give even a second to think, and he delivered another blow directly to the student's face, causing bleeding, and the situation became worse every minute. Who realized that his opponent was unable to resist him, and sensing his. But the bandit didn't stop. He grabbed the hero by the neck and began to choke him, squeezing Yanni's throat harder every second, as if he were. The friend stood on the side, not knowing what to do, and the big man couldn't believe his eyes, not expecting that someone. Doonji realized that it was impossible to just stand and do nothing, and he rushed at the villain and ordered him to immediately release Yang's throat. But the guy didn't even allow Doonji to get closer. The villain sent him to the ground with a deft and quick. The blow was so strong that the big man could barely stay on his knees, clutching his stomach and groaning in pain, and blood also flowed from his mouth. The enemy did not give him a moment to recover and immediately grabbed Doonji, hitting him hard on the heart. Who ordered them to never appear in this place again, emphasizing that they needed to gain hatred to become stronger, and he warned that if they dared. Salad's threats only brought a smile to the big man's face, and he was always pleased when people addressed him in a raised voice. It turned out that the guy's father was the captain of Ho's city police team, and the big man mockingly told him. Having learned this information, the villain slowed down and freed Doonji, but the hero did not know who his comrade's father worked, which surprised Yang. Who, remaining calm, decides to let them go as he doesn't want to attract trouble, and then prepares to leave. However, he warns that if they find themselves in front of him again, no guarantees will save them, even if one of them has a father who works in the police. This time the guys manage to avoid more severe consequences, and Yang decides to check with his comrade about the veracity of the information about his father, and if he had not spoken the truth, this cold-blooded and merciless person would probably have led him to death. Suddenly, Ian's phone rang again, and the guy tensed up a little, because lately. However, this time the situation turned out to be different. It was Tujia, and on the phone she said that she would now pick him up near the school, and the problem was that the guy was in a different place. The girl immediately felt that Ian was in trouble, and she asked where he was, and, trying to lie, the guy realized that she should not be trusted. Realizing the meaninglessness of the lie, Yang told him that he was on the Susan Road. The hero asked her not to take risks, since his location was dangerous, but the friend hung up without listening to him. 15 minutes later, a luxurious white foreign car drove up to Yang, and at first he didn't even realize that it was Tujia. But it was her. The girl got out of the car in a beautiful red dress and ordered the guy to get into the car. During the trip, Ian persistently asked his friend whether this car was really her own, since he still could not believe it. Then it turned out that Tuts was somehow offended, and the guy clarified what exactly it was about his behavior that offended her. In fact, the friend was not offended, but rather angry and asked who dared to beat him like that. Yang, as usual, began to avoid answering and stated that these were small things that Tujia did not. However, the doctor is not so easily deceived, and she understood that someone had deliberately beaten the hero badly, and was realizing that there would be no answer. She came to terms with it, and nevertheless, Tujia was not going to leave everything as it was. Everyone passing by noticed their car, especially the license plate, which indicated that the car belonged to the Su family. It turned out that they were heading to one of the many gambling establishments in the area, and the girl loudly opened the door and announced her presence. The main visitors were, as usual, men, and they noticed a beautiful woman and began showering her. As expected, Ian couldn't afford to stand by while his girlfriend was being insulted, and he threatened them and told them to shut up. The men did not appreciate such impudent behavior, and they themselves were not against teaching a lesson to the small upstart, and tension began. However, Soojia intervened in the situation, and she suddenly picked up the heavy chair from the floor. Apparently, her irritation was not in. Suddenly, she started breaking all the slot machines in front of her, and it was surprising to see her in such a situation. What he saw shocked all the visitors, including Ian, and he looked at his friend, wondering where she got so much strength from. While the girl didn't even think about stopping and continued to destroy everything around her, glass shards from the vending machines flew in all directions. At some point, Tuts decided that enough was enough and stopped her pogrom, and immediately after that the girl did not pay attention to this. She just called the guy to her and said that it was time for them to leave. The hero hesitated a little, because of which his companion simply grabbed his hand and headed towards the. However, already at the exit they were stopped by the manager of the establishment, who was not going to just let this couple go after what happened. Suddenly, one of the visitors told him that most likely this lady was from the Su family, so it was better not to get in her way. As she left, Soojia added that she would discuss what had happened only with the head of the establishment, and everyone around continued to be amazed. Soon they left the establishment, and driving past the bridge, the hero thought that perhaps it would be better for him to just go home, and he could no longer take such. The girl decided not to waste time, and helped him treat his wounds on the way home, trying to do it as carefully as possible. At this point, Yang began to think about his strength again, realizing that he needed to continue searching for ways to become stronger. His girlfriend reassured him, claiming that he was not to blame, since no one is able to change a society where everything depends on money. However, this did not stop him from moving forward, and she believed that he would become truly strong and be able to protect those who were dear to him. From these words, Yang felt embarrassed, and no one had spoken such kind words to him before, and the hero turned away hesitantly. He quickly came to his senses, looked at his friend, and tried to justify himself, saying that it seemed like. Soojia assured him that everything was fine, and at that moment Yang looked especially cute, and she approached him. The hero breathed a sigh of relief and smiled, glad that he no longer had to apologize for his shyness. Suddenly the girl asked him to close his eyes, and at first the guy did not understand what was going on, but soon realized that he was preparing for a kiss. Before Yang even had time to realize what was happening, Soojia kissed him, and the hero tried not to ruin the moment. Afterwards, they both felt a little uncomfortable, and it seemed like they were in a hurry, but they both enjoyed it nonetheless. Finally, Ian returned home, although, in fact, his thoughts were still revolving around what had just happened. As he approached the house, he heard a conversation between a man and a woman expressing disgust at him. Ian didn't understand how they knew information about him, because he had never met either a man or a grandmother before. Upon entering the house, Ian was surprised, because there were no lights on anywhere, which was strange, because usually at this time the situation was unusual, and Ian decided to check his aunt's room, and as he approached, he heard her crying. The light was on in the room, and he came closer, and Tanya was lying on the bed, crying heavily, and clearly the hero was upset by what he saw, and he needed to find out the reason for his step. He walked up to Yuri's room and sat down next to her, asking if she knew what had upset their tan so much. Turning to the girl, he accidentally touched her thigh, and he did not do it intentionally, but it was too late. Yuri began to cry and accused the hero of being a pervert, and in this state it was difficult to get any information from her. The guy tried to justify himself, but his girlfriend's character was too rude, and she continued to call him a pervert. Only after 10 minutes were they able to start a conversation, and it turned out that those people, Grandma and Uncle Yuri, had come to take her with. They decided to do this because the grandmother believes that Tan gave birth when she was not yet married, which led to a strong quarrel. Ian realizes that the situation is difficult, and he needs to do something to help a loved one. Suddenly, he asks his friend to give him an honest answer to the question, and whether she wants him to leave and no longer appear in their house. And the girl, she didn't want the guy to leave at all, and she didn't even want to hear about it. And besides, she needed help in the current situation. The guy is happy with this answer and says that he needs to become stronger, and then he will try to be there when necessary. Yuri again takes this as a personal insult and, shouting that he is a pervert, pushes Ian off her bed, and it looks like that kiss had a big... The next morning, while jogging, the hero thinks about only one thing, and that is how he can become stronger and find... He tries to remember all the moments when he saw the manifestation of real power that could influence what was happening around him. The first thing that comes to mind is the scene in the staff room when he faked his injury and the headmaster showed his true... He remembers the moment when he backed down after learning that his friend's father was a police officer, and that earned him respect. And what he also recalls the incident of Tujia, who destroyed someone else's property and then left without anyone daring to say anything. And of course, the man who gave Ian a hard time, and he feels like he needs to take him down in the future. For now, he is too weak to resist Hu, but he still needs to defeat him. The hero lost not because of weak fists, but because of a lack of fighting skills and practice, and so he begins to train hard. Over the course of several hours, he practices the techniques that his grandfather taught him when they lived in their native village. At the end of the workout, he decides to run a few laps to consolidate the result, and he intends to train like this every day. Suddenly, while running another lap, Ian notices a strange picture, and several schoolchildren are standing around a man lying on the ground. Coming closer, the hero bitterly realizes that his friend Duanji is lying on the ground, with abrasions on his face, and it was... The guy picked up his friend and helped him sit up, and it turned out that Tin ordered her men to attack him. Yang realized that the hooligans had already started their actions, and was surprised as he didn't expect it to happen so quickly. So he picked up the phone. Suddenly Duanji came up to him and said that there was no need to call an ambulance. He did not want to go to a regular hospital for fear. The guy was not going to call the hospital and stated that his friend's injuries were minor, and there was no point in going to the medical center for such trifles. It was decided to go to the school clinic, and it was better if the big guy stayed here so as not to attract unnecessary attention. Yang began to heal Duanji's wounds and asked him why his father never stood up. He once offended an important road boss, and because of this, when the guy was in second grade, his mother was killed. The hero was shocked by this revelation, having no idea that his friend had such a terrible past, and Duanji added that his father was terrible. His mother died, and his father was promoted to the rank of captain, and yet he never mentioned her, showing indifference. Hearing these words, the guy realized that his friend needed help, and he decided to do something. Deciding to do something, the guy decides to make a deal with the rival gang and asks his big guy where he can find their leaders, and he heads off to negotiate. A few minutes later, they arrive at an establishment called Song of God, and Duanji knew that those who ordered his beating frequented this place. Without further ado, Ian is ready to enter the establishment and talk to his enemies, but his comrade is not so decisive, and it's still... The hero replies that if his friend decides to go, then only with him, and Duanji must prove that his mother's death was not in vain and become stronger. The guy still felt sorry for his mother, and she will forever remain in his heart, and now he no longer intends to tolerate the way he is treated. The guys go inside and head to room 382, as the front desk told them that those they are not looking for are there. As they pass the next floor, they hear a familiar female scream coming from one of the rooms and decide to see what is happening there. Looking through the door window, they see some scoundrel pestering their old friend Linyu, and for a second they wonder what to do. The girl is clearly in danger and screams, asking them to leave her alone, but this does not bring any results. Seeing this, The friends exchange glances and decide whether they should help this girl, because she has done a lot of bad things to them. There was little time to think, and eventually they knock down the door and demand to stop, threatening to post a video of what has happened. The pervert immediately got scared and ordered them to leave, claiming that they were unnecessary because he had paid for them. The girl sat on the sofa and cried, begging for help, as he forced her to do something she didn't want. Hearing this, Ian warns the freak that if anyone is superfluous here, then it is definitely him, and he should leave quickly if he values. The attacker claims that they don't understand because decent women don't go to such places. However, the guys have a recording of everything that happened, and the attacker realizes that he can't do anything and throws money on the table, trying to pay off and escape. But he promises to return, closing the doors, and threatens that next time there will be more than one. Yang tells the girl that she needs to quickly come to her senses, pack her things and leave, since it will soon be unsafe here. Suddenly the door to the room opens and Tin Tin and a man with a tattoo are standing in the hallway, asking why the two are here. The picture looked completely different from what it really was, and there were them in the room, Lingyu in tears, and the guys thought that, misunderstanding the situation, the hooligans are going to beat up Ian and his friend, thinking that they were the ones who offended their friend. The girl tries to explain the situation and tells the truth, and that she was molested by a pervert, and these two saved her. At first, Ting Ting does not believe her friend's words, since she had a bad opinion of their conversation is interrupted by knocks from the corridor, as if a herd of animals were running there. As it turned out, it was a pervert with a crowd of his accomplices, and a serious fight was brewing. A few seconds later a brawl broke out, and it was difficult to determine who was winning. Taking advantage of the moment, the guys decide to hastily leave. Dronzer notes that the girl was indeed in danger. The friends managed to escape from the chaos without coming to an agreement with the hooligans, but they laughed, leaving when the fools fought among them. Despite today's joint struggle, the conflict still remained unresolved, and they had to come to an agreement. Suddenly, they became aware of a noisy crowd gathered to the side, with a man in the center announcing that traditional martial arts were being demonstrated. Friends showed interest and rushed to join the crowd, and they made it perfectly in time, and two masters, with a young boxer on one side and a bald old man on the other, it was a clash between traditional Chinese martial arts and modern boxing. Under such tension, the crowd became agitated, shouting the names of their favorites. This turned out to be a difficult question, since each of the participants in the ring had its own. The fight began, and the old man instantly rushed to the attack, showering the enemy with many quick blows with his. The young guy easily dodged and blocked all these attacks, and at some point decides that it's time to end this fight with the old man. Now it was his turn to attack, and after blocking another blow from the old man, he threw a powerful hook. As a result of this powerful blow, the elderly man instantly fell to the floor in a state of knockout. Blood flowed from his nose. It all ended quite quickly, and the referee announced the winner and raised the hand of the stylish boxer, to which the crowd around enthusiastically. The elderly master could not even leave the ring on his own, and his young student gave him support, and the old man left under the ridicule of the crowd, who claimed that he was a liar and not a real man. Dronzer was impressed by the young boxer's fight and suggested asking him for advice, perhaps even signing up for boxing. The friend did not even notice how his comrade broke away from the crowd and disappeared, and immediately after the fight he went in. It turned out that he had gone in search of the master, and Ian barely had time to approach him when he was already getting into the car. The guy ran, begging the master to wait a little, and it seemed that the hero had an urgent matter related to martial arts. Indeed, the hero asked the old man to teach him the elements of the traditional martial art of Tai Chi, and he sought to have he lead. The master was surprised and thought that the schoolboy was simply mocking him, given his loss in the battle, but the guy didn't think so, and Ian understood that the old man lost only because of the difference in speed and unfavorable battle rules. Hearing this, the master calmed down and asked if the guy had studied Tai Chi before, and the hero replied that. However, even with this information, the old man did not want to teach him, and after all, a loss. Yang was serious and had no intention of leaving, continuing to persuade Helian that the master was tired of this conversation, and he replied that if the guy was so determined, then let him come to his martial arts center. Helian left, but the guy was happy, because this meant that he was given the opportunity to prove himself, and tomorrow he could start training. The next morning, Yang showed up at the gym at the address the old man had given him, and the gym looked like a place where he could learn a lot. The first person the guy saw when he stepped inside was a girl with pink hair, busy kicking, and at first she did not notice. After greeting the guy, she interrupted the training and asked who he was and why he came. Yang replied that he was looking for Master Helian and came to learn martial art from him, and they had already agreed on this, and the girl recognized him, since the master warned her. The guy introduced himself and said that he had previously practiced Miao-style boxing, while the master's student praised his experience, saying that it was good as he should have a strong foundation if he had practiced boxing before. She decided to immediately test his skills. Suddenly, without warning, she grabbed his hand. At the age of 25, Qin had already studied traditional arts with her mentor for a long time, achieving impressive results over the years. The guy was not ready for such a rapid attack and fell unsuccessfully to the ground, and it never even occurred to him that their first meeting could be. A real enemy gives no time to wait, and a real fight could break out at any moment, and he had to seriously think about it. The guy didn't have to explain his intentions twice. He quickly understood and was. Qin was impressed by the guy's energy and became really interested, while Yang was surprised at how easily she avoided his. Then Qin, declaring that it was her turn to attack, threw the guy to the ground in one motion. And this girl turned out. However, Qin believed that this was not all, and decided to check the guy's physical fitness, but only slightly. Master Helian stopped this beating by reminding his student that Yang had just entered their hall. The old man believed that Ian had good fundamentals and natural ability, but lacked maturity and experience. Ultimately, the teacher was pleased that Yang was not afraid and came, especially considering that after yesterday's loss, almost all the students left him. The girl immediately tried to console the teacher, saying that those who left could not recognize his great talent, although they had eyes, and the old man was glad that he still had the. He does not blame those who left, since it is natural to have their own views on the successes and failures of their idol, and now he offers to carefully check his new student. The guy was not mistaken in his judgment, and the master's instructions were clear and refined, and he easily mastered the basics of martial art. After being introduced to the basics, he was paired with Qin, and despite the fact that the hero had only been a disciple for one day, he could not escape it. Instead of talking about sparring in a short period of time, we can say that he was beaten to a pulp. The girl was devoted to martial arts, and for her there were no differences between men and women, and besides, after Yang was thrown 15 times, kicked and hit more than 30 times, his body quietly gained a lot of experience and gradually began to recover. When it was all over, the guy was relaxing in the hall, and his partner was already getting ready to go home on a motorcycle. The girl invited him to ride a motorcycle and advised him to hurry up, since he would not wait long, and Qin invited him to eat hot dogs. But they didn't stop at hot dogs and went straight to the restaurant, ordering a whole bunch of food, which they forced to fill the entire table. During the meal, the guy noticed a strange man in a raincoat and cap, standing out from the crowd, because it was quite warm inside. The girl did not pay attention to this and asked why he was so confused, and maybe he did not like spicy food. At this time, news was broadcast on television about the escape of a prisoner convicted of drug trafficking. It also became known that a white prisoner attacked a police officer and took his gun, at which time the guy asked the girl where she worked. Qin replied that she worked for the police, and if he ever committed a crime. Yang didn't hear what his girlfriend was saying, and he looked more at her body, which was constantly dripping with drop. They soon finished dinner and needed to clear their plates, and unfortunately, there were no paper towels left on. The hero decided to ask that strange man in the cap for help and asked if he could borrow some paper towels from. The stranger didn't answer, just buried his nose in his plate and continued to eat his food, and the guy decided to just go over and take the towels. When he returned to his table, his friend told him to lean forward, and Ian asked what she meant and what was the matter. She noticed that the man's behavior was suspicious, and from the contours of his chin, she deduced that he was the same white prisoner who was talked about in the news. The hero asked what they should do, considering that the criminal probably had a gun, and however, the girl replied that a gun would not help him. The moment came when it was time to go outside and call Zhang from her cell phone, and the girl decided to stay behind to keep an eye on the man. Yang agreed to follow the instructions and essentially had no choice when faced with a strong and dominant woman. A minute later, the guy was already on the street, reciting every step in his mind, and they had no... It took some effort to find the right number on his phone, but he eventually succeeded. Suddenly, like a bolt from the blue, a voice came from behind him, ordering him to hang up immediately, and because of this was understandable, since there was a gun behind him, and the guy asks the man not to be so impulsive and the criminal, having overheard their conversation in the restaurant, the guy could only obey, raise his hands and explain that he was forced to take these actions, and after a few seconds, the criminal was distracted by a noise coming from the side, and he turned his head, distracted for just a moment. At this time, Qin, using her fighting skills, kicked him hard on the head, but the enemy somehow managed to block this blow. Although he managed to do this, it was not easy for him to stand on his feet, since the girl's skills turned out to be... Qin ordered the villain to drop the gun because she works for the police, but the man was not going to do this and said that this woman... Ian watched what was happening, worried, and the situation was extremely dangerous, and his girlfriend could simply be shot. At that moment, a shot rang out, and the villain decided to shoot at the girl and hit her in the shoulder, causing bleeding. The hero was in shock and he screamed in confusion, not knowing what to do, since the situation was obviously not in the... After a few moments, he realized that he could not cope with the enemy without a weapon, and began to quickly scan his surroundings. In the end, he only discovered a brick lying nearby, but it was better than nothing, and he knew how to use it to his advantage. Yang took advantage of the fact that the man was distracted at that time, and forcefully threw the picked brick right. He hopes that his improvised weapon will earn the drug dealer's approval, and without wasting any time, the guy quickly grabs the gun from the criminal. After knocking the criminal to the ground, the guy points his gun at him and warns him that 10 minutes later, the villain is already sitting inside the restaurant, tied hand and foot, and apparently he got what he deserved from the employees. Yang takes his wounded friend in his arms and asks the waiter to hurry up and call an ambulance. The girl was lying in his arms, and it never occurred to her that such a guy could do such an act, and Qin felt like she was dying because she was in a lot of pain. The hero reassures her that she shouldn't worry, because she definitely won't die, and being hit in the shoulder caused her to lose a lot of blood, which made her drowsy, but he knew how. After this, the waiter comes up to them and says that, unfortunately, he only managed to find chicken, and cow fur and cobwebs were nowhere to be found. Fortunately, this was enough, and if everything went as it should, the hero's girlfriend's blood loss would stop in a few minutes. Ian takes the chicken in his arms and tells the waiter that he is now free, and usually the guy does not resort to such methods, but this was an emergency. The hero was going to help his friend, but, unfortunately, this would mean damaging her clothes, and the wounded girl, of course, doesn't mind. Yang now acted as a doctor for Qin, following the necessary procedures, and he carefully cut the t-shirt in the area where the bullet hit using scissors. He then warned Qin that the next stage might be painful and asked her to feel free to scream if the pain became unbearable. The method involved melting chicken feathers using fire, and the resulting mixture was excellent for disinfect. The process took some time, but everything went according to plan, and within a few minutes, when the medicine was ready, Yang quickly applied it to the area where the bullet hit, and Chin screamed in pain and sweat covered her face. Fortunately, after a few minutes everything was completed, and Chin could finally rest a little, and paramedics arrived on the scene, took Chin away, and sent her to the hospital. And thanks to Yang's help, a police officer approached Ian, introduced himself, and asked if he was the one who called to report what had happened. After this, the officer expressed his gratitude and reported that Ian had done an excellent job, and Yang also agreed to arrange for Chin's motorcycle to be delivered to her home, and he confirmed that this task was not difficult for him and he would be happy to help. The chance to ride a motorcycle lifted the guy's mood a little, because he had not done this for a long time, and it was a great opportunity. After analyzing what happened to him over the past days, Yang decides to visit Tujia, since she evoked special feelings in him. The next morning, he is already at the hospital where the girl works, and according to her, he came just in time, because she had free time. Finding himself in the nearest shopping center, the guy even had the strength to make joint purchases, and naturally, he was all for it. If it weren't for the girl, he probably would never have visited such a place, and the guy wasn't a fan of crowded places and preferred to relax in the fresh air. People around noticed the guy's strange behavior and did not miss the opportunity to make fun of him, calling him a hillbilly, and they believed that he was lucky to have such a girl. Because of this, he was even more embarrassed and realized that such places were not to his liking at all, and he wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. Tujia suddenly interrupted his melancholy, offering him a stylish suit and persuading him to go to the fitting room to evaluate him in a new look. After 5 minutes, the friend was eager to see how her friend looked in the new suit, and her interest in his image was enormous. Despite all the ridicule about his rustic behavior, this suit fit him perfectly, and it made him look like a successful businessman, and even he himself liked it, although Tujia's gaze was full of love, and it seemed to her that the suit was created especially for him, and even the store employee noticed this harmony. The saleswoman joked that they looked like a wonderful couple, which embarrassed the hero's friend, but she did not deny this compliment. After a busy shopping trip, they headed to the embankment, and the sun was setting, and everything around them took on a special. Suddenly the girl noticed that many people were dancing nearby and invited the guy to join, and Ian was so happy that he was ready to go anywhere. A friend asked him about his dancing skills, and her expression showed that even if the guy is not very good at it, she would be happy to teach him everything she knows. The hero was a little worried, because he had never danced in his life. Even traditional dances seemed alien to him. This was no problem for Tujia, and she grabbed his hand and pulled him to the dance floor, intending to teach him so that next time he could use these skills when seducing others. It turned out that it was not so difficult, and after a few attempts the couple looked quite harmonious together, especially in the sunset. During the dance, the hero's head was spinning with thoughts about how beautiful she was, and at that moment he lost his vigilance and accidentally. This caused her to feel briefly touchy, and she felt like the guy wasn't trying. Maybe he wasn't interested in dancing with her. At that moment, Yang decided to take the initiative, turning the girl's face towards him. Then he pulled the girl close to him and kissed her, and Tujia probably didn't expect this at all, and the guy didn't know how she would react. At first, the friend avoided the kiss, but gradually began to approach Ian, and in the end they finally accepted. After some time, they continued to look at each other with loving eyes, as if they were in a beautiful dream. The couple sat peacefully by the river for a long time, discussing various topics, and the girl shared with. Since childhood, she maintained a friendship with a boy from a less wealthy family, and around him he was constantly tormented and under the pressure of constant bullying. The boy at some point could not stand it and came to the conclusion that his humble origins made him unworthy of her friendship. This incident greatly affected the boy, and he felt that his life had no meaning, and after losing his friendship, he had no friends left, and eventually he decided to commit suicide. It turned out that the boy was an orphan raised by his grandmother, but she also died shortly before the tragic events, and in the worst period of his life, the child lost his last support. Young tried to console his sobbing friend, and she was worried that all her life decisions were made by him. Finally, the guy realized why she treats him so specially, and the one who always lived in her heart was similar to him and had similar life experiences. Events take us to school, where Dronzer introduces several guys to his friend, and apparently he is going to create his own group to confront the gangs. There were 4 recruits in total, and 2 of them turned out to be twins, and despite their appearance, which did not look like those of fighters, there was potential in their eyes. Ian greets his new friends and declares that they are now brothers, and then he hands the big guy a wad of money. At this moment, his plans were different from the others, and Dronzer was amazed, because his friend was far from rich enough to spend money. Before starting the task, the hero announced the urgent need to protect the school grounds, and he no longer wanted hooligans to freely do their tricks in the educational institution. The guys enthusiastically took on this task, and it seems that they can't wait to test their strength in the fight for justice. As it turned out, the hero's plans were systematic training in martial arts, and he persistently honed his. The guy's eyes were full of sweat, but he had no intention of stopping, continuing to improve his skills, and he couldn't wait to gain strength as quickly as possible. Suddenly, a familiar female voice came from behind him, and it was Chin. Apparently, she had already recovered from her injury and was ready to join the fight. Yang insists that Chin's injury still requires at least 2 months of rehabilitation, and she should not put herself under strain during this time. The girl agrees, considering that the guy seems to have more knowledge in medicine than her, and suddenly they hear screams from the office of their mentor, Hooligans. In the conversation, it turns out that their masters may be expelled from the Martial Arts Association, and as it turns out, the Martial Arts Association demands that they have a rematch in a month, and if they lose this time, they will be expelled from the. If he fails, Hooligans will be forced to close his martial arts center and retire, and the old man is afraid that he will no longer be able to fight. Chin asks the teacher for permission to fight in his place, but Yang reminds her that with her injury she cannot do this, and offers to fight for the teacher's honor himself. The hero has a month left to find a way to defeat his opponent, and in this short time he will have to learn many complex techniques and tactics. The opponent he has to fight turns out to be the same boxer to whom even the teacher quickly lost, and will Yang be able to defeat him? Suddenly, a lot of people with cameras and microphones appear in front of him. All these people gathered for him, surrounding him on all sides and trying to get answers to their questions, and as it turned out, his future fight attracted the. Everyone present was interested in how this student was able to so skillfully neutralize the criminals in that situation, and Ian replies that he only. An hour later, he finally managed to escape from the clutches of the reporters, and in such a short time, the guy. During a school break, his favorite teacher approaches him, and she asks how such an important event could have happened. The hero didn't quite understand what was going on, but he was already thinking about how she was going to punish him this time, and their relationship was very specific. Yue is also interested in the same situation as the reporters earlier, and she is worried about the guy and asks him to evaluate his strength next time. Ian understands this and has long realized that if he gets hurt, there will be many people who will worry about him, and therefore he should always be on. This answer satisfies the girl, and she gives the good news, and next month they are going to reward the guy, and the ceremony will be held with the participation of the whole school. The hero was delighted, and besides, his teacher says that she can help him win a place in the provincial art competition if he is interested. Ian asks her to slow down a little, because this was the first time he learned about this competition, and he needed more information to make the right decision. Yue advises him to take advantage of this chance, because if he can win, he will easily enter the provincial medical school, where he can realize his potential. The flow of information made the young man dizzy, and during the current month he was faced with a huge number of tasks, while his time was extremely limited. The main character became the object of everyone's attention, which did not go unnoticed in his class, and the girls whispered among. Ian absolutely did not resist such attentiveness and simply absorbed every moment, and despite a slight feeling of unfamiliarity, he was glad that those around him had finally noticed him. Suddenly, 2 classmates approached him and told him that someone was looking for him, and envy was visible. As it turned out, an unfamiliar lady in a snow-white outfit was looking for him, and she entered the class and looked for Ian, and I wonder what brought her here. A few moments later, she found a guy sitting at a desk, and the girl was extremely attractive. Her voice sounded charming, and her hair had an unusual. Approaching each other, a conversation began, and Ian expressed his curiosity, asking why she needed to look for him, given that they had not crossed paths before. Her name was Imogen. She was 18 years old, and it turned out that she was his partner. This beauty was popular at the academy, and however, despite her attractiveness and talent, the hero noticed that she maintained a rather cold. A few minutes later, they were already in the dance training hall, and at first Imogen was eager to find out if he had ever danced on stage or even off it. This year, the competition took on special significance, and the participants could not afford to fail, and now, as partners, the guy had to absolutely. When Yang heard this, his attention was instantly diverted from continuing the conversation, because Imogen, on the other hand, showed interest after hearing this and came up with an idea on how to use the guy's skills to teach him how to dance in a relatively short time. Then the girl took out an unusual musical instrument from the shelf, which was a circle with several bells. Her task was to combine the femininity of national dance with the masculinity of martial arts. A new acquaintance asked the hero to demonstrate his skills in traditional Chinese martial arts in order to understand who she was dealing with. He began to perform the exquisite Tai Chi techniques that he managed to remember at that moment, and the girl calmly stood and watched. The guy's enthusiasm began to gradually fade, but then the girl also joined in, dancing with grace, and they quickly found mutual understanding. Intuitively, they reached a silent agreement and moved harmoniously in a beautiful dance, discarding all their. At one point they appear to be a pair of lovers doing their white dance, and a person not familiar with the context might. Suddenly, their performance was interrupted by applause coming from the other side of the class, and they were so. Imogen's former partner, Qingjiang, the most popular guy in the academy, entered the class, and his partner was a little scared by his appearance. Qingjiang was 2 years older, and he continued to applaud. And it seemed that his. However, Qingjiang had no intention of praising the guy, and in his opinion, he would only. But Qingjiang's words did not affect the hero, who, thanks to the high school senior, found it funny to hear such remarks, and as the eldest of the Lin family, he couldn't imagine a situation where he would have to be jealous of a hillbilly like Yang. The guy was not interested in getting into an argument with this person, so he left and told the girl. Although at home the hero only regretted that he had spent the day in vain, because he could have continued training at the martial arts academy. The next day came, and Ian calmly headed to school, and suddenly a person appeared on his way whom he didn't. It was whose face expressed great anger, and he asked the guy if he thought he could get away with destroying all his slot machines. According to the bandit's calculations, he lost approximately 3.5 million yuan, and if the student did not reimburse him for this amount, then his fist would tell him the consequences. Yang was aware that such a situation could happen, and he was preparing, and of course, he did not have that amount. Although he was clearly not on the same level as there was nowhere to retreat, and he was left with only one option to do his best. The villain realized that today he would not get his money back, and his patience had run out, and now he was not going to waste time on this. He quickly rushed towards Ian and swung his palm at him, deciding to start with a strong slap in the face to put the brat in his place. However, who did not expect that the hero had a knife, and as a result, the guy only received a strong slap in the face, and who was left with a deep wound. He still couldn't believe that this schoolboy risked using a knife against him, and blood flowed from his wound, staining his entire shirt. Yang asked Hu if he thought he was afraid of him, and it was clear from the guy's face that everything happened exactly as the hero had planned. After that, the man completely lost his composure, ready to swear that he would not let this guy go and would end him once and for all. The situation became more and more dangerous, but the hero had already managed to learn lessons from recent events, remembering the words of his mentor. These internal forces allowed Yin to gather his strength at the right moment and drive away the feeling of fear, and he managed to deliver another blow with a knife to the enemy's shoulder. However, his opponent was firm and, even having received 2 stab wounds, found the strength to respond. With nowhere to retreat, Ian decides to use all available means, and he bites his enemy's shoulder forcefully. As long as he could breathe, Yang had to continue fighting no matter what, and even as a result, he managed to inflict serious injury on his opponent, despite the fact that he only had his own teeth and willpower in his hand. Taking advantage of the moment, Hu forcefully kicks the guy in the chest, and from such a who gave him a good beating, and any other person would have remained scared half to death for a long time. But this, although Yang was lying on the ground, he feels like a winner and notes that he imagined their fight a little differently, and the hero he then laughed loudly, showing his confidence. And on the outside he may look like a... The man pulled out the knife that was still sticking out of his shoulder and declared that now this brat was definitely dead, and Ian suddenly began to wonder. But soon the villain was interrupted by a voice coming from the school grounds, and one of the passers-by decisively asked who dared to beat the students. To the express surprise of everyone present, it turned out that the offender was Imogene and her dance partner, and they came to the hero's defense, ordering the... From the conversation, it became clear that Xinjiang and Hu already knew each other, and I wonder under what circumstances these two people were able... Despite objections, the gangster pointed out that they were off campus and had nothing to do there, which, in his opinion, the dancer continued to persuade him, emphasizing that they had clearly heard the request to end the conflict, and Xinjiang persistently asked not to provoke the person behind her, who realized that before him was a representative of an influential and wealthy family, and he could not be touched, much less beaten. The situation forced the villain to retreat, but he warned that this was not the end, and next time he would bring the same pain. But the hero continued to laugh and advised his enemy to take care of himself, because he survived and was not going to stop. After the villain left, Imogen rushed to the guy and discovered serious injuries, and the girl asked whether she should call the police or go straight to the hospital. Yang assured her not to worry and added that now that he could no longer dance, she could return to her prince on a white horse. However, the moment that had come was not the most suitable for such discussions, and Imogen was ready to take her friend, at least not to the hospital, then to... Obviously, her dance partner didn't like it and didn't want to deal with this hillbilly, so he began to persuade the girl to take the guy somewhere else. The two of them then went to Tujia's house, and when the doctor saw the condition of her friend, she became afraid and asked how. The dancer decided that now her task was completed, and the guy had someone to help, and therefore she did not want to interfere and went. However, Imogen asked the hero to consider participating in the competition and not. At first, Ian thought that she was an arrogant and proud person, but fortunately, he realized that he was deeply mistaken. The doctor took care of the injuries that Hu inflicted on the guy, and the girl understood that he wanted to deal with the villain. Tujia both scolded and worried about him, and her gentle voice seemed to ease his pain, and even taking advantage of the moment, the hero said that he was in pain and asked his friend to take care of him a little more. It seems that the girl completely spoiled him, and at this moment the guy was a little upset, because she again treated him like a small... In response to this, Ian decides to demonstrate that he is quite an adult by taking another cherry from his girlfriend's hands, and with a grin, it turned out that he not only touched them with his lips, but also bit them. And this unexpected act scared the girl, and she asked the guy if he even realized what he was doing. Suddenly, Yang jumped up from the sofa, took Tujia by the hands, and assured her that of course he understood what he was doing, because after that, he pulled the girl to him and kissed her, just like that time when they walked on the embankment, and the hero was absorbed in this kiss, falling in love with her from ear. However, she pushed him away, saying that he was still too young, and what seemed like love to him looked. At this moment, Yang felt no fear, and confidently confessing his feelings. This caused sadness in Tujia's eyes. She lowered her head and expressed deep disappointment, and it was impossible not to understand. But the hero insisted on his opinion, and he realized his inequality with such a girl, but inside he felt that she saw in him not only a brother. Despite all the arguments, the girl asked him to continue to treat each other as brother and sister, because this was extremely important to her. The guy was not happy with this, and he knew that he was not worthy of her, but he still liked. Tujia recalled that there was a huge age difference between them, and Yang still did not understand that love is not just sympathy, but the On that day, when the hero was on the verge of death, he did not feel fear. And so why should he now? These words finally convinced the girl that she could completely trust Ian, and with him she felt like she was behind a stone wall. The scene shifts to the award ceremony, and the next one to rise to receive his award was the hero, and right now he was invited to collect his well-deserved award. Standing on this stage, built exclusively for him, he finally realized why so many people flock to it, because the view from above is completely. After presenting the award, the guy posed for a long time for the cameras, and reporters asked him to share his impressions of this moment of glory. At that moment, the sense of duty to defend justice overshadowed the fear in his heart, and Yang remembered his teacher's instructions and began his speech. With sincerity, he admitted that he had read the script provided by the director from the first to the last word, and the guy agreed. After the ceremony, his little sister Yuri immediately ran up to him, waved her hand and called him a great hero, and once she noticed the cast, Yuri asked why Young hadn't removed it yet, and her acting became more and more realistic. The guy had to endure it, because he didn't want his aunt to worry about this, and so he simply asked what his girlfriend wanted from him. While passing by the director's office, she heard that his candidacy was going to be excluded from the arts competition, and it seemed to her that this turn of events happened because of Ian's speech. Even though the guy was initially not very interested in participating in the dance competition, now it became a matter of principle, and the hero decided to stand up against the system again. The next day, Doonji asked his friend why he asked him to find a stray cat and what he was going to do with it, and Young again gave him an order without explaining anything. The hero simply believed that this was already obvious. He needed the kitten in order to cure his injury, and yet his comrade. Normally, Yang's arm would take about 2 months to recover, but now the big man thought that his friend wanted to eat the kitten, which is why he was very scared and was ready to run away with his new pet. The guy did not have such thoughts in his head, and he threw in the ginger root and told Doonji to prepare special. After 15 minutes, everything was ready, and if the guy knew that one of the ingredients of the since we are talking about gangs, the hero asked his friend how things were going with his main enemy and a gang of ferocious tigers, and at the same time he continued to mix the ingredients. As a result of whose injury and being unavailable, his charges were incredibly weak, and yet their brothers were able to successfully defeat the tiger gang, who is seriously injured at the school gates, but he is not going to give up easily, and Yang must gain the upper hand by striking the first blow, and even if the smell of cat urine is not the most pleasant, its healing properties and healing fractures are undeniable, and thanks to it, who will be able, after going through the necessary procedures, who hurried to the dance hall, where his partner, Imogen, was already. The girl was delighted to see her recovered partner, and she was already beginning to fear that he would give up and not return to training. This award was important not only for the guy, but also for his dream. The beauty turned to Ian with a request to dance with her, and the hero was surprised to learn that she could be so sweet after meeting her. A month before the competition, he regularly visited the training room, dancing with his partner, even on weekends. The time spent together seemed easy and magical, and the guy's condition improved miraculously. Gradually, the hero overcame his prejudices about dancing, and the combination of martial arts with folk dance became a source of true pleasure for him. This period of idyllic harmony was interrupted by a sudden call that shattered their dome of peace, and it is interesting that this happened when the guy's hand. Ian also responded to a call from an unknown number for the first time, and a premonition of trouble arose in his soul, which was not carried away by the light. It turned out that the caller was Lingyu, a brash girl whom they had once helped escape trouble, and she begged the guy not to hang up and listen to her. According to Lingyu, she learned that Hu had just been discharged from the hospital, and she warned him that he should escape as quickly as possible, and after all, he saved her life. And she does not. Yang, naturally, asks questions about where she got such information and why she is helping him, but Lingyu does not have time to answer, as she is attacked. The male voice on the phone finds out with interest who he is talking to, and then the connection is cut off, and most likely, Lingyu is discovered,